still more than 4 hours before the game was scheduled to start. It was Mike Vollmer's time to shine. As Saban's director of football operations, Vollmer was in charge of many of the football program's logistics, an area the attention-detailed Saban cared a lot about. But now it was time for him to present his research. Vollmer had to offer in-depth reports on the things that Alabama couldn't control so that it could, well, control them to the best of its ability. Vollmer's report included detailed information on all of the referees and their tendencies over the last 2 years so Saban could offer specific instructions to his players. For instance, Vollmer would explain how often a back official called pass interference, information Saban would then take to his defensive backs to guide how aggressive they could be against opposing receivers. He'd do the same for weather reports, eschewing the local weathermen for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to ensure the information was as accurate as possible. If it was going to rain, Saban wanted to know the expected outcome for every hour the game was played to inform his decisions. Vollmer would go over the stadium diagram for away games, where the opposing band and student sections were situated, where their traveling fans were, and so on. So everyone knew what to do in certain situations. If we go to overtime, we aren't going to start talking about it then and there, Vollmer says. We're going to that end of the field based on the way things are laid out in the stadium. The detail that went into that stuff prior to even kicking off was amazing. Saban loves being prepared, constantly searching for any and every possible advantage he can find. He knows that the person with the most accurate information and the best way to harness that information will likely be successful. That's an excerpt from the book I'm going to talk to you about today, The Leadership Secrets of Nick Saban, How Alabama's Coach Became the Best Ever, written by John Talty. I enjoyed this book for lots of reasons, but mainly because it's laid out almost like a blueprint for what anyone can do to adopt and implement the strategies and tactics Nick Saban used to become one of the greatest leaders and coaches in sports of all time. Each of the book's chapters is titled like a Saban maxim. You'll see chapters named Only Promise Opportunity, Give Distressed Assets Another Chance, Delegation is Good, but Too Much Kills the Culture, and Evaluate Yourself Constantly, Evolve When Necessary, to name just a few. There are 18 chapters in this book, and although Nick Saban didn't take part himself, John interviewed dozens of Nick's former players, coaching colleagues, and support staff to arrive at a candid and clear picture of how Saban operated over his 50-year coaching career. I highly encourage you to purchase this book to get the nuance and the context of what went into Saban's processes and how he built one of the greatest dynasties college football has ever seen, and how he became one of the greatest coaches, not only in college, but in sports in general. This episode is also pretty timely. Just last month, I'm recording this in February of 2026. Just last month, Indiana University went on to win the national title. The same Indiana University that is one of the losingest programs in college football history. How'd they do it? Well, they were led by a guy by the name of Curt Cignetti, who was a Saban disciple. In fact, he was a coach with Nick Saban when Nick first arrived at Alabama in 2007, was his recruiting coordinator at that time, worked for him for 3 or 4 years, and went off to become a head coach himself, and eventually found himself at Indiana and became very popular for the way that he went about building his program, which in fact is a very similar way that Nick Saban built all of his programs in college football and in the NFL, and the program that he built in Alabama that he enjoyed so much success at. This book includes so many lessons I think anyone can learn and apply to their own life, no matter if you're a college football coach, of course, or if you're a coach at any level. You don't have to be a coach, though, at all. No matter what it is that you do, there are things that you could take from the way Nick Saban approached his work and apply them to your own work to improve what you do. I've distilled, though, the maxims that I just went over that were revealed in the chapters even further to arrive at 6 core principles that I believe propelled Saban to win 7 national championships in college football, the first of which coming at LSU in 2003, followed by 6 others at Alabama after a stint in the NFL with the Miami Dolphins, but 6 titles at Alabama to equal Bear Bryant in a former era at Alabama, in 2009, 2011, 2012, 15, 17, and then Nick Saban's final national title at Alabama in 2020. Here are the 6 principles that I believe made Nick Saban who he was and what he believed in to get results that he accumulated throughout all of his coaching stops, including at Alabama. Number 1, abundantly clear communication. Number 2, what's called the process. I'll dig into that later in this episode. Number 3, preparation. 4, leadership development. 5, adaptability. And 6, an extreme aversion to complacency. I'm going to dive into all 6, and I'll share examples from the book that will help you understand how Nick Saban applied these principles in his coaching career. And hopefully, again, you'll take lessons from this episode and apply them to your own work, no matter what it is. Again, I highly encourage you to get the book to go deeper on all of these principles and find out even more about what Nick Saban did and how he developed his program to get the best out of not only himself, but of course the players, the coaches, and the staff that he worked with throughout his career. The foundation of all of the 6 principles that I just listed was formed long before Nick Saban ever considered becoming a football coach. He grew up in a small coal mining town in northern West Virginia, and his dad, Nick Sr., had a profound impact on his life. Nick Sr. taught his son that the only way to be successful was to work hard. He'd tell his son often, if you don't have the time to do it right, where do you find the time to do it over? Whenever Nick was doing anything of consequence that Nick Sr. was observing, that's what he would hear. Because it's going to be done right, his father would tell him. It was that kind of no-nonsense, crystal clear communication that became a hallmark of Saban's coaching career. In the book, it describes that Saban intended to establish that everything players and coaches did was to be done to a certain standard from the very first day. He didn't get into a new program and do a listening tour, for example. He didn't convene focus groups before understanding what it is that he wanted to do and communicating that to his staff on the very first day when he became a head coach, or when he was a position coach in the NFL, working under Bill Belichick in Cleveland. He would communicate exactly what he wanted done to his position group players, defensive backs, the defense in general, or again, when he became a head coach, to anyone within the program. He laid out in clear terms what that standard was, what Nick Saban's standard was, and communicated it to everyone in the building. One of Nick Saban's favorite sayings is, quote, mediocre people don't like high achievers, and high achievers don't like mediocre people. Again, he did this at all of his coaching stops, no matter if he was a young coach or if he was a veteran coach. In the book, it states that when you set clear expectations, this is Nick talking, from the beginning, it eliminates most potential headaches in the future. And he stuck to that maxim throughout his entire career. Crystal clear communication was something that he worked on daily. He understood the power of communicating very clearly and setting an expectation and a standard for everyone within his program, not just the players or the coaches, but everyone who touched the Alabama football program or the Michigan State football program or LSU football program when he was the head coach there over 25 years ago. From the book, it states, but first Saban had to set expectations for everyone working in his new football program. He told Todd Alles, one of his first hires as director of football operations, to gather everyone in the building, janitors, secretaries, anyone who worked in any capacity within the program for a 3 p.m. meeting. Saban walked in and delivered a message that has served as a crucial tenet to his Alabama success. Everything we do, Saban began, is about recruiting. Everything we do. I love this example from the book because not only does it display Saban's ability to hit the ground running immediately and set an example and a standard and clearly communicate that right off of the bat without wasting any time, but he seized on the one thing, not 2 or 3 things or 4 things, of course, but the one thing that he knew was going to measure up to success at Alabama or not, and that was recruiting. And it includes everyone in the program. I love that he included anyone who had anything to do with the building, including the janitorial staff or secretaries that would work closely with the program. Anyone who would come in contact with a player or a coach, he wanted to make sure that they understood that it mattered that the building was cleaned, It mattered that the first impression that a recruit has, if they meet with a front desk attendant and that's the first impression they have with Alabama football, that communication would be done to a certain standard. So it was crucial that he communicated very clearly what was success in his mind and what wasn't, and that everybody, not just the players and not just his staff, bought in. Of course, communicating his expectation for success wasn't just something he did on the first day when he was introduced as a head coach. It was something he did every day, constantly, and especially when he saw someone making a mistake. Saban addressed it right then and there. He was often quoted as saying, this is probably one of his most popular phrases as well, is to say that you never want to waste a failing. If Saban saw someone making a mistake, he'd step in and correct it immediately. There was no letting things slide in practice because they occurred during practice and not a game. Communicating with the media was no different. Same principles applied in communicating with the press as they did with his players and his staff and any administrative staff that he had in his program. From the book, it states that he enacted a one-voice policy where he's the face of the program and parries away any arrows that may have been directed at an assistant coach or player. It's a strategy he learned from Bill Belichick with the Cleveland Browns. Some may say this is controlling, almost dictatorial, but to Saban, it was super important that he controlled the message, not only because he knew exactly how to leverage the media to get certain messages out that he wanted to repeat and often make sure that his players heard again and again, or his staff heard again and again, but it deflected any issues that might come up for his staff to deal with or for assistant coaches to deal with. He would take those arrows, as the book states, and it was important to him to set the tone and set the message for the program and be in control of the perception of Alabama football, and he was the one who was responsible for that. Back to the book. What he does through messaging is he reinforces ideas. I think this is a really important point, by the way. He knows exactly when he meets with the media what he needs to say and what he's going to say to drive a point home. You can't just do a one-off message. It has to be reinforced. There's a lesson here in repetition in what you're saying and what you're doing. There's nothing better than getting it out to the media, because what does the media do? They replay his messages over and over again. And Nick Saban knew that his players were listening, his staff was listening, and he needed to repeat things over and over, whether it be on the practice field or especially in the media, so that it actually sunk in. And no matter what it is that your message is, whether you're a business owner and you have a brand to continue to build and communicate to your customers and prospective customers, repetition is something that is very important to do, and Nick Saban understood this innately. It wasn't just the clarity of Saban's spoken or written communication that mattered. Everything that he did in communication mattered. And there's several examples in the book that give us a really good indication of how he just operated on a day-to-day basis relative to communication in general. Clear communication to him meant even drawing near perfect X's and O's on a whiteboard. One of his assistant coaches remarked at one point, quote, "It might seem frivolous, but it was one of the things that most impressed L.C. Cole when he worked with Saban at Toledo." Cole marveled at how Saban drew plays on the board. "It's like he has a stencil the way he draws those circles," Cole says. "I would practice drawing circles and squares." It's hard to imagine these days that coaches are actually practicing drawing circles and squares, and probably many don't. But if you work for Nick Saban, and this was in the early 90s when Nick Saban was a head coach at Toledo University, but nonetheless, you get the sense that when you work for Nick Saban and you see the exacting quality that he does everything, including drawing X's and O's on whiteboards, you want to rise to that standard. His communication skills were unmatched in the game, and it set a standard for everyone who worked for him, and everyone wanted to improve the quality of that little detail, which of course improved everything else that they did. Simple and clear communication extended all the way down to how Saban implemented play calls with his players and coaching staff as well. From the book, in football, every coach has different terminology they use for their play calls. Even if the plays are similar, the verbiage can be very different. It's common when a new coach comes in to bring the plays they are accustomed to calling, and everyone has to learn the new terms. But Saban didn't believe in that. Why should 50 or 60 players have to learn entirely new descriptors as opposed to one coach having to do it? The way that Saban went about communicating with his coaches, players, and staff And anyone else who is part of the program is a byproduct of what Saban and others who have worked for him and alongside him called, quote, the process. That's the second principle that I think is so important to how Saban built his program and became one of the best to ever coach college football or sports in general. When Saban was the head coach at Michigan State University in the mid 90s, he was looking to gain every edge he could. In his first 3 years there, the program was 19, 16, and 1. Although Michigan State isn't necessarily a traditional power, just hovering above 500 wasn't certainly good enough for Saban. It certainly isn't good enough for most coaches in the modern era. So he was looking for everything he could possibly do to improve and to get his hands on new information so that he could become even more successful on the field. He found an edge when he met Dr. Lionel Lonnie Rosen, a Michigan State psychiatry professor who created, along with Nick, what's known as the process. So what is it? The process is the engine that powers the Alabama organization, the system and mindset that everyone must follow. Competing organizations have tried to copy it, though no one has perfected its execution like Saban in Alabama. The process is many things. Most importantly, though, it is a daily way of living. It focuses on completing the task ahead of you at that moment and not worrying about what happened in the past or what might be around the corner in the future. You can't worry about what anyone else is doing around you. As former New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick would say, you just do your job. Let's dive into this a bit further. From the book, it talks about Alabama building, and it builds still, probably to this day, taking what Saban left there, along with many other programs. It builds its winning mindset without actually discussing winning. Here's the key point. At the very heart of the process is Saban's deep aversion to a results-oriented strategy. If Saban ran a car dealership, as he had often said he was going to do, that's what his initial career plan was before he was asked to be a graduate assistant by one of his mentors, Don James, he'd suspend all monthly sales quotas at this car dealership if he were to run one. He didn't believe in such a specific outcome-driven strategy was effective or sustainable in the long term. Not long after he arrived at Alabama, he told one staffer how disturbing he found the mentality of a season boiling down to a national championship or bust. Ironically, Nick Saban never thought about conference championships or national championships. He thought about, once he met the psychiatry professor at Michigan State, doing the little things day after day after day the right way, and the score takes care of itself. Reminds me of another wonderful all-time Hall of Fame football coach, Bill Walsh, who wrote a book by that title, The Score Takes Care of Itself. That will be a future episode. But he also believed that avoiding a results-oriented approach meant that you were living in the moment, focused on the next play, the 6 seconds ahead of you on the football field, doing it the right way. And if you made a mistake, you forget about it and you move on to the next play. Also sounds a lot like Curt Cignetti, the head coach at Indiana University, who I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. For Saban, the process really came down to discipline. His system was predicated on everyone in the organization having the discipline to avoid the things they knew they shouldn't do and do what they knew they should, even if they didn't want to. That could be anything from getting to bed early rather than going out with friends to giving it your all on every single rep during a grueling fall camp practice in August with the Alabama heat beating down on you. If you could master those simple concepts, you flourish in Saban's system. He'd tell his team that everyone has the ability to invest in the process. It just comes down to whether they have the desire and discipline to do so. He framed it as a decision everyone had to make. He said, do you want to live the pain of discipline or live the pain of disappointment? He told them he'd always choose the pain of discipline because it meant he'd never deal with the pain of disappointment. That's such an incredible quote and frames this process that he developed so clearly. And again, Saban often repeated this phrase over and over and over again, and phrases like them to get it into the minds of the players and the staff that he worked for him. The process is to focus on actions and behaviors to be successful in the moment It is not at all focusing on results. One of those actions that received an inordinate amount of Saban's focus was the act of being eminently prepared for seemingly everything. Preparation, which is the third principle of the six that I outlined at the start of this episode, is key to Saban's success and one of his secrets to becoming the greatest football coach in college football history. From the book, there was no piece of information too trivial to include in a player's profile if it could help gain an edge. Trevor Hewitt, who was a Saban assistant at Alabama, remembers including details on how one top recruit liked mustard and another enjoyed eating cereal for dinner. I referred to the player's profile above. These were often called Saban sheets within the organization, and it was a system and a process by which all the coaches adhered to know exactly which players to recruit and go after. So there was a system and data points that they would all adhere to, so they knew kind of who to recruit. But then once those basics were checked off the list, they would find every bit of information they could on any recruit so that they could personalize the experience as much as they possibly could. There was a great example in the book that relates to what I just talked about, with one of the examples of being so detail oriented that they knew that a recruit liked cereal. And so Saban got on the phone one day to this particular recruit, and one of the first things he said was, "Hey, are you eating Lucky Charms or what?" And the recruit was taken aback and couldn't believe that Saban understood that he knew that he loved cereal as much as he did, and he would eat it at any hour of the day. Those things, those little things, meant the world to an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, and it often made the difference between the recruit going to Alabama or Texas or another blue chip program. Saban loves being prepared, constantly searching for any and every possible advantage he can find. He knows that the person with the most accurate information and the best way to harness that information will likely be successful. Here's an example from the book. During practice of a game week, Alabama's scout team would run through every play its opponent ran in a game over the last year. And if, for instance, that opposing school's defensive coordinator was at a different school the previous season, they'd look at everything he did there too. 1 in a million chance we could see that play, says a former player. We were going to practice it. As a result, Christian Jones, a former Alabama wide receiver, says in his 4 years playing for Saban, he can remember only 3 instances during a game when the opposing team did something they hadn't seen before. Being prepared is a mindset as much as it is a lifestyle. It takes a lot of work to be as organized and attention to detail proficient as Saban, skills he actively works not only to maintain but improve every single day. It should be no surprise that the best prepared people are usually the hardest workers, because they make a conscious decision to make the time investment knowing it can directly correlate with success. Walt Saban was at Toledo with one of his assistants that I mentioned before, L.C. Cole. L.C. remembers getting a call one morning from Saban. It was Christmas Day. L.C. picked up the phone and he hears, "What are you doing, L.C.?" Saban asked. At the time, L.C. was his running backs coach. "Well, I'm here enjoying my first Christmas with my wife," Cole responded. "You want to go watch some film?" Saban asked. "My wife heard him and looked me right in the face," says Cole. "I said, 'I don't think so, Coach. You're going to make me get divorced.'" The phone call left a deep impression on him. Man, this guy is on perfection on Christmas Day. He's looking at film on Christmas. Saban is fond of saying, "I can handle the good news and I can handle bad news, but I don't deal with surprises very well." The best way to never be caught off guard, Saban thought, is to be prepared, and he would go to great lengths, obviously, to make sure that he knew everything that could confront his team during the game week, or certainly during the game. It's a philosophy that flows throughout his entire organization. When he coached, Saban kept a 18-month master calendar that everyone in the organization is expected to follow. Saban's day is planned down to the minute, a dual desire for efficiency and structure to maximize his output and limit any last-minute surprises. Preparation is a big deal, but it isn't everything. And as Saban realized early in his career, you can have the best game plan in the world, but if you don't have the right people to execute it, it simply won't work. And that brings us to the fourth principle, which is Saban's ability to develop leaders within his organization. What Nick Saban was so good at was making every member of his organization believe his or her job was critical to the overall success of the program. From the book, that might be easy to do with the offensive coordinator making $3 million a year, but it gets a lot harder with an entry-level employee making $25,000 who is multiple layers removed from the top of the hierarchy. It is a form of empowering leadership, and when deployed correctly, it can be incredibly effective. Consider what I mentioned earlier in the episode when Saban asked for every employee to come to a meeting where he stressed the importance of recruiting to Alabama's potential success. Not only did it set clear expectations, but it was Saban's way of showing that everyone in the building, including the janitors and secretaries he mentioned in his speech, played an important role. The other fact about Nick Saban's leadership style and his philosophy on leadership is that he didn't want leaders just like him. He went out of his way to select coaches and staff who had unique and diverse perspectives on how to coach, lead, or train. He knew that many players and many individuals within his organization had different needs, different perspectives, came from different backgrounds, and so he wanted a staff that reflected all of those things. He knew that he had a certain way of doing things, and he was very set in some of the ways that proved to be successful for him over time. But he also knew that that's not everyone's style. So whether it was a strength conditioning coach, whether it was an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, an analyst, anyone else in the building, he went out of his way to make sure that he had a selection of leaders and develop those leaders that were from very different backgrounds to respond to the very diverse team that he led day in and day out. From the book, it wouldn't have been wise for Saban to surround himself with assistant coaches who did things the same as him. It might have made him feel comfortable, but it was a surefire way to alienate portions of the team who needed different tactics. Saban understood that when you are developing leaders in your organization, you don't want them to all look and act like you. And when there was turnover on his staff, and there was plenty of it, Saban viewed it as an opportunity to improve. About 15 or so years ago, start of the 2010s, he really pioneered what is now commonplace in many college football programs, especially upper echelon college football programs, by employing what are called analysts who come in and support the staff through reviewing film, offering their advice, or almost like consultants within the football program. And the way he did this was he employed former very successful head coaches who maybe reached a top tier program like Tennessee, thinking about Butch Jones or Jeremy Pruitt. Both of those individuals didn't have success at Tennessee and earned a lot of money through their coaching career at Tennessee, but were fired and wanted to rehabilitate their image and try to get back into head coaching. And the best place to do that was in Alabama and working for Nick Saban. And since they had made so much money, Nick Saban could create this position called an analyst and pay them $25,000 or $30,000 a year. Money made no difference to these folks. They had already made enough. Saban was able to get these individuals who had expertise in coaching, different philosophies of doing things, were able to help kind of get into the details of what Alabama football was doing and provide even more expertise into how they moved their program forward. He did this expertly throughout his career, especially at Alabama when this started around 2012. From the book, it states that it required foresight and openness from Saban to see the value in hiring coaches deemed failures elsewhere. He established it because it was about what those coaches could do for Alabama, not what they had done elsewhere. A coach like Butch Jones may have failed as a head coach somewhere else, but typically he had to have done something right to have gotten that opportunity in the first place. Rather than focus on the failure, Saban sees a distressed asset that can be acquired cheaply, will be motivated to prove his doubters wrong, and a significant experience that can be valuable to the organization. I mentioned near the beginning of this episode that Nick Saban won 7 national championships as a head coach. He won those titles over a span of nearly 20 years, which is remarkable on a number of levels, least of which is Saban's ability to adapt his coaching methods and leadership style over several different eras of college football. He worked with so many different coaches, so many alpha coaches who had success at one program but then were let go but had made enough money to then welcome into Alabama's program to help them. One of which is Lane Kiffin, of course, who is now the head coach at LSU, had great success at Ole Miss, but once upon a time flamed out of coaching at USC after failing in the professional ranks with the Oakland Raiders and was looking to rehabilitate his image, wanted to continue coaching, was a savant and still is on the offensive side of the ball. So he came in and helped Alabama change and adapt its offense and its way of playing football so that it can continue to win national titles. In the early 2010s and late 2000s, in 2007, 8, 9, Alabama was offensively a ground and pound kind of team, which meant hand it to massive backs like Mark Ingram and Derrick Henry, TJ Yeldon, Najee Harris, those types of individuals, and run a pro-style offense that really wore out a defense. But Saban saw, after he won a national title in 2012, that the game was starting to change. Spread offenses were taking over. RPOs, run pass options, were starting to take hold of the game and put more power in the quarterback's hand to make decisions on what he should do with the ball, given what the defense was doing on the other side of the line of scrimmage. So Lane Kiffin was a guy who was an expert in that kind of offense. And to think that Nick Saban, the alpha of alphas, invited Lane Kiffin in to be his offensive coordinator and to move his organization forward through this new way of offensive football is a remarkable thing and shows Nick Saban's capacity to adapt and his foresight to understand that he couldn't stay in place. We'll get to avoiding complacency here in just a bit later on in this episode, but it speaks to, again, his leadership style, his foresight, and his ability to adapt in a number of different ways. It certainly is one of his greatest strengths, and it's the fifth principle essential, I think, to his long-standing success. From the book, one of the biggest misperceptions about Saban is that he's a rigid man, unwilling to change his ways. The truth is he's very rigid about certain things, like the process we talked about earlier, of not focusing on results in the pursuit of greatness, but he is willing to change other aspects of his strategy and coaching, like with Lane Kiffin coming in as his offensive coordinator and changing the way Alabama football played offense. Saban won 4 national championships with one style, saw the game was changing and adjusted on his way to winning 3 more titles in a completely different way. It's hard enough to win one championship in sports, of course. It is incredibly difficult to have that standard set and met again and again across over 20 years, nearly, of being a head coach and winning multiple national titles. It is incredibly complex and difficult. It reminds me of other athletes and exceptional leaders, and athletes in particular like Michael Jordan, who, when he became older and couldn't do the athletic things that he was doing earlier in his career, like going to the basket and hanging in the air for seemingly forever and then converting a shot that only Michael Jordan knew how to do. As he got older, he integrated a fadeaway jump shot into his game that could not be stopped. A little less athletic, still really athletic play, of course, but something different and something that he had to adapt to because his body simply couldn't do the things that it could do at 21 when he was 31, for example. Tiger Woods is another great example. After winning multiple majors early in the 2000s, he wanted to change his swing. He knew he needed a different swing to withstand all of the tournaments that he played in. It needed to be more sustainable long-term for him, and he knew if he wanted to continue to win majors as he advanced in age, his swing needed to change as well. Would have been easier for any of those individuals to think that they could do the same thing over and over and over again, Nick Saban included, and expect the same result, but that's simply not true. So to stay on top for so long as Nick Saban did, to win 12 conference championships, along with 7 national championships in multiple eras of college football, certainly requires an aversion to staying complacent. And that's perhaps the thing more than anything else that sets Nick Saban apart from everyone else. From the book, this great example, it talks about the morning after Saban won one of his 7 national titles. He had Mike Vollmer, again, his director of football operations, hastily put together a meeting in the team hotel ballroom. Just hours after winning his first title at Alabama, Saban offered a short congratulations before lamenting that the program had fallen behind in recruiting and would need to deliver even more in the upcoming season if it wanted to stay on top. That's simply crazy. Imagine being in that room. Imagine being an Alabama football player. The greatest night of your life just occurred several hours prior. And you're in a meeting and your head coach offers some congratulations as if you may have just won a non-conference game in September. But this was authentic too. But you hear your coach talking about how the program is falling behind because playing the national championship game cost the program a week or two or more of recruiting. Nick Saban is simply not impressed with anything that has been done. It's always about what we have to do it over again. From the book, John does a great job of describing this, and I think he's right on the mark in saying that if there's one lesson to take away over all others from Saban's successful approach, it is his total and complete aversion to complacency. One of Saban's favorite quotes that he preaches to his organization over and over again is, quote, "Complacency breeds a blatant disregard for doing what's right." So much of what he does daily is about fighting complacency within his organization. In many ways, it's a fight against human nature. He's doing everything he can, both professionally and as a leader, to get everyone in the Alabama organization to keep fighting every day as if they hadn't just won a national championship. That's episode number 2 of the Pantheon podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. I'll talk to you next time.